Melany is from the East Coast, and she wrote a book that you might have all seen called Mason Goes Mushrooming. And gosh, yeah, she's been traveling the country, just doing events with kids, and would really like to share with us tonight her experience with children in the woods, because lots of people are nervous and think maybe, you know, it's not something that kids would enjoy yet, or that there's a trick to it, or they're going to get bored. So I think she's going to dispel a lot of myths. And before that, I wanted to ask Antoinette if she wanted to unmute, and you guys had a big announcement as well.
Okay, so Melany is author of Mason Goes Mushrooming, as Kathy mentioned, and on Friday we learned that it received the Independent Book Publisher Association's Benjamin Franklin Award for New Voice in children's book and adult books. So we're very, very, very excited.
Congratulations, Melany.
Yeah, that's the IBPA.
And I should mention, Antoinette, say where you're from.
Where I am right now? Oh, I am in Palermo, Sicily, in Italy.
And will you get to do any mushroom hunting over there?
We are starting in the spring.
Okay.
Yeah. I haven't for years, but I'm starting with an expert in the spring.
Nice.
Yeah.
I have one more quick announcement, and just
not spring yet, Antoinette?
In the warmer spring, because we're going to I'm in the city, so we're going to the Madonia National Park, which is a higher elevation. So probably in a couple of weeks. I asked last week and they said it's not time yet. So any minute.
There you go.
Awesome. And I'm going to put one more link in the chat. It's a link for a volunteer sign up. So if you want to come early or man one of the stations, help us do snacks, or even just set up or take down, we'd love to have helpers. All right. Well, Melany, welcome. And thank you for talking to us on Zoom right before we get to see you in person.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me all. And my experience so far with folks in Minnesota has been nothing but outstanding. And to the extent that you want to, and I'm not going to push it, but I'd really love to see as many of you as you wish, because I would like to have this be more of a conversation. A lot of times when we amateur mycologists or even professional mycologists, when we get together, we do a lot of looking at slides and pictures and microscopic images and so on. And we don't always talk about the community and the connectivity that happens with mushroom foraging. And Kathy introduced me and said, I was going to share my experience, but I'm actually also super interested to hear about your all experience, because there is something about mushroom foragers, and I think you all know this because you're here for one thing, and you have a particular interest in foraging. There's something about us, and I say this playfully, although with a fair amount of seriousness, that's a little kooky, right? We're just a little passionate or zealous, or really, really love to go out foraging. And we encourage others to do it. And we love it when our kids get excited about it, or our grandkids. And so I want to speak tonight to that spark, to the thing that makes your heart sing, that draws you into the forest or the playground or the cemetery or the sidewalk, where you go, whoop, there's a mushroom, gotta go look and see what that is, right? Not everybody does that, by the way, right? Most of the people that you know probably don't drive around like we do, like this, right? Like they don't do that. And have bumper stickers on the back that says, I stop for mushrooms and all that kind of stuff, right? So I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that I'm talking to a group of fellow enthusiasts, for lack of a better term, who share this passion, who share this desire to get out in the woods and forage for not only wild mushrooms, but also everything else that the forest offers us, right? Because it's, as you know, it's the world's greatest treasure hunt, right? It's a constant surprise. What's going to be underneath that tree, that leaf, that log? And this is what makes foraging so wonderful for children, right? The idea that they can go out into the woods and be super duper present with all five senses lit on fire, their smell, their taste, their touch, their sense of awe, the surprise, the look of a salamander under a fern they didn't expect, a bird's nest, a spider's web. There is so much happening in the woods, right? And the foraging, the lure of the mushrooms is just an excuse. It's just a way to kind of get our minds and our bodies and ourselves and our families and our kids away from, I'm sorry to say, what we're doing right now, which is the screen, and into the reality, which is our neighborhoods, our parks, our conservation areas, our natural wildernesses, that it's so important for us to have a relationship with. So foraging with children, in my experience from my own self being a forager from the age of 2, literally, my parents are artists and they were very, very enthusiastic foragers from a very young age. My father never missed an opportunity to, dig for a clam or pick a wild blueberry or catch a fish off a boat or do anything he could that was getting food from the land, right? So that desire is part of what fuels our current day desire to get back out into the woods. There's some survivalist bit to it about, feeding our souls and our bodies and nourishment, but there's also something about foraging that connects us very deeply to nature, right? And that connection is the same connection as to why we even want to have a family in the first place, right? Why we want to have deep roots someplace, why we want to build a home, why we want to plant a tree in our yard. All of those things is connectivity to the earth and the planet. And foraging has that in spades, right? So my approach to this whole thing is not only about having done this since I was a child and then introducing it to my kids and then writing a book about it in order to have a chance to take it around the country to other kids, but it's also hearing about your all experiences. I'd be very curious to know how many of you learned to forage from a generation that came before you. How many of you were taught by friends or relatives who learned it from the oral tradition from somebody else? And so that's the conversation that I'd like to have. And also, what are some questions that come up for you when you are, sharing your excitement or being with your kids or being with other people's children? If you're an educator, what are some of the best ways to share what we know as foragers and as amateur mycologists or even professional ones, what we know to be the power and the secrets and the treasures that are in those woods? So that's where I'm coming from. And that's what I'd like to do tonight in the short amount of time we have together. I'd really love to have these kind of conversations and hear from you all. Where did you learn to forage? How did you learn to forage? And what are some questions you have about foraging? I do see in the chat already, there's a question about Mason goes mushrooming and whether it's appropriate for third graders. So Mason goes mushrooming is it's a picture book. I'm going to show it to you. It is absolutely for 4 to 9-year-olds, and it has in it 4 different mushrooms, 4 different adventures, 4 different recipes. So the first one, your all's state mushroom, the morel, and at the end of each chapter there is a recipe. In this case, it's a morel omelet. I do get bragging rights from Vermont. This was my day today. Okay, this is the first haul of, whoops, and they're coming out. The first haul of morels from an orchard here in Vermont, and they are lovely, beautiful specimens. And some of them more lovely than others, like this guy here. I mean, again, I wish so much that I was with you all, because mushrooming is tactile. It's sensory overload. It's smells, it's touch, it's feel. You know, you get the texture of these. And these I found in an orchard, but of course not too far from some dryad saddle, pheasant back, which is a really good indicator, that lovely polypore base underneath it, but a really good indicator of some nice dead elm trees that ought to have some nice morels with them. So yeah, let's open it up to a conversation. And this is a book to read aloud to kids going to bed, or if it's a 4-year-old, it could be read to them. If it's a 9-year-old, it might be reading to learn as opposed to learning to read. And so it does span that different age group. And then a lot of parents have told me with their older kids, oh, we got into making the black trumpet chips, in the oven, because it was a really simple recipe, and all the recipes in it are geared towards younger kids. But the book is one part of it, but really my focus, my love, my desire is to be out in the forest, be out in the woods with children, talking about giving them permission, for lack of a better term, to explore the wonderful kingdom of fungi, which, as you all probably know, a lot of times, what are kids told about mushrooms?
Right. They're
Like,
poisonous. Don't touch them.
Yeah, they're poisonous. Don't touch them. A lot of no, right? So part of what our job is as educators, as parents, as foragers, is to encourage kids that they can touch mushrooms, they can photograph them, they can cut them open, they can make a spore print, you can look at them under a magnifying glass or under a microscope, you can interact with mushrooms. And in fact, mushrooms are vital, they're critical to our existence, right? Without them, we don't have the yeast in our breads, we don't have the alcohol in our beers, we don't have the penicillin in our medicine, we don't have any of the soil in our forest. The benefits of mushrooms so far outweigh the very rare possibility of poisoning. And what I do tell families and kids around mushroom introductory mycology is, like anything, like any outdoor pursuit, whether you're hunting for sure, fishing definitely, wild berry picking, you need to approach it with some degree of knowledge, training, and safety. You're not going to go out and go start, wild turkey hunting with a gun without some training. You're not going to go out wild mushroom hunting without some training. That seems very self-evident. The good news is groups like yours are doing such an amazing job training and bringing in new generations of mushroom hunters. And that is really giving us, such an easy leg up to start these conversations with this oral tradition of passing on the information generation to generation. And kids love it. My experience is kids get out in the woods and they are just beyond thrilled to have this experience of being told, yes, the woods are for you to explore. Yes, let's go do it. So I'm seeing some new pictures. Somebody has a gyrometra, I think that is. I'm not really sure. Yeah, a gyrometra from the same place. Okay, so you all have been out and about. Let me hear from somebody who wishes to share how you first learned to mushroom hunt if you were a child, and whether or not it was from somebody who was older and you know and it was intriguing to you.
Anyone want to share a story? I actually have the exact opposite experience of the first mushroom I ever tried was I ended up buying my grandma's house, and I remember this chicken of the woods growing on a tree in her yard, and we were so afraid of it until someone stopped their car, and it was just it was striking and beautiful, and they said, "Can we have that? Can we eat it? It's so good." And, you know, of course we said, "Yep, you can." And then every year after that, my grandma would call them and say, "Your mushroom's ready. You should come pick it." And she laughed.
I love a neighbor like that.
Yeah, like, "Well, I hear it's a delicacy, but we've never tried it." And it's funny how we never ever had the kind of the courage, I guess, or the wherewithal to try it, and almost laughed at the people who came to get it. And told them, "Well, it's you should come get it because you like it." So I think I had that exact opposite experience. And when we finally did try it, like, I wanted to shout it off the mountaintops and tell the whole world.
That's great. I love that story, Kathy. Don't you love the people who have like huge hen of the woods growing in their yard and they're like, "Oh, sure, you can take that. I don't want that thing. It's messing up my yard." Asia looked like she had something to add. I think you might have to unmute, Asia.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Well, when I was a kid, I would say my first experience with mushrooms was just me stomping on those giant puffball mushrooms and letting the spores come out, not knowing they were edible. And I think my stepdad actually said something about them being edible, but of course my mom was like, "Oh, don't stomp on them, they're poisonous, like you don't want that stuff on your clothes." And of course it like ruined my shoes, but I was really fascinated by that. But other than that, I would say just growing up in the woods, I mean, I always found ramps, didn't know what ramps were, but I was eating them as a child before I even knew what they were. Probably not safe, but I mean, I was a curious kid. And I would say my daughter Saphira, she kind of started liking it just because I was dragging her out in the woods and, you know, getting her into it. So, you know, at least she'll be able to learn.
I have a story about Saphira. We met at a mushroom foray, and she knew so many of the mushrooms that she ended up being like the junior foray assistant, kind of helping people describe things. And she was the eyes to see them, so that we made sure that we were all looking in the right places, because once you start seeing them, you can't stop seeing them. And then you get so excited and you see them everywhere. And I remember you doing cartwheels on the way back. You were so excited about all the mushrooms we found and talking about how much you loved mushrooms.
Yeah, that's a great story. Does she want to add anything to that? Does you remember those cartwheels?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Once we went out, like when we first started doing it, I wasn't really that interested in it, but after like a couple of times of doing it, I started getting really interested in it, and I realized how much I liked learning about something new that I never really thought about learning about, because it's kind of a thing that when you're a kid, it's just like, oh, this is just like a vegetable. Why would I want to learn about this? But there's so many and so many different kinds and so much to learn about them. Like I wasn't expecting all that, and then I was so excited about it.
It's kind of a good. My kids have enjoyed it as a. There's what's the term when you have like a party game that you're good at. So if Mason or Allie go off on hikes, you know, they've gone on a lot of hikes, they'll be the kids who can identify all the mushrooms, and then suddenly they're sort of like, you know, a step up because they know all the names of the mushrooms and whether or not you can eat them, and there's no other kids that know that. So they're sort of like, wow, how do you know this? And it's quite an exciting time for them. One time a few years ago when Mason was in middle school, he went on a class hike in the springtime, and they found a big haul of morels. And it's still to this day one of my best morel spots that he found on a school hike. And the rest of the kids are like, "What are you doing?" He came back with a bag full. So yeah, it's a wonderful thing to be able to share amongst your age group as well, not just intergenerationally. Anyone else have any interesting stories of how they learned to first forage, or not, like overcame the big no? That's so impressive that, some people were told don't ever touch those till they were in their 30s and 40s.
Yeah, I share. Am I on? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I started at age 3. I was young like you. My grandmother took me to the woods, and we had many cousins that lived on farms. So it wasn't unusual that throughout the whole entire summer to fall, we would go to the woods and not only pick mushrooms, but nuts and berries and visit. So my mom would always make soup and homemade bread and a pan of bars, and off we would go for at least 4 or 5 hours. And so we learned to pick a lot of the same mushrooms because that's what they knew. So we're a Czech family, and we sold mushrooms to the Norwegians and the Swedes who were in Decorah and Kalmar. So,
Oh, wow.
but they didn't want to go out, but we had access to the farms because I have a lot of cousins. So that's how we paid our book bills for school.
Wow.
Mushrooms.
Oh,
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So malaria, honey mushrooms is what we sold in the fall.
Oh, wow. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, if they like
Maitake.
malaria, you could have a huge haul of those every fall.
Yep.
That's an amazing story. Sometimes people ask, maybe not so much in this crowd, but I often get, where do you begin? Where do you begin with kids? And what you just said, we always picked certain ones.
Mhm.
And so I consider everybody who's part of a mushroom club to be in the realm of like a mushroom educator, because every time you go off on a walk together, you're crowdsourcing all that information. You're sharing everything that you know. You all know, you've been on walks. You pick up a mushroom, you pass it around, you look at it. Somebody knows the Latin name, somebody else doesn't. Somebody wants to take a picture. Somebody's never seen one. You want to know what tree it's on. You want to know what it likes. When does it come out? That's how you're learning your mycology. You're there sharing with each other. And so part of what's so extraordinary about these clubs is how much free knowledge is being passed around all to each other for $15 a year. Or $20 a year. It's like, why is everybody not doing this? You get a community of incredible people. You got an activity every weekend you can do for free with your family. You can find amazing fresh food. You can learn so much. It leads to all these other rabbit holes. You can go out with somebody and they want to show you their stinging nettles and their, wild fiddleheads. And all of a sudden you're off into the world of that. You got somebody else who wants to make tinctures, and then you got somebody else who wants to learn to show you how they do cultivating mushrooms. And all of a sudden it's like a full-time job, just trying to be an amateur mycologist, right? Because of all the people that you met who were so passionate. And you're like, wow, there is a whole world to be explored and discovered here in my backyard with all these people that live, within 30 minutes of me. So I feel like it's a tiny bit, and I think in Minnesota, for sure, you're experiencing it with the growth of your club, but it's a tiny bit of like the best kept secret, right? And it's becoming a little less best kept. But for those of us who were doing it for a long time, and for whom, the secret was out, the word was out, it's really fun to talk about your origin story, how mushrooming came to you, how a love of fungi, whatever aspect of it. There are plenty of mycologists like ourselves who don't even like to eat them. It's really not about that. It's much more about some of them just like to dye wool with them. Other people just like to make spore prints. Some people just want to sell them. That's all good. It's all great. But it stems from this same desire to deeply connect to the places that we call home and really explore them in this very, very personal, intimate way with our landscape. And so how do we get our children, the next generation, to be informed in the way that we were? So this is where origin stories and how our love of this came into being becomes really worth talking about, really worth having a conversation about, because for all of us, it's different. I mean, I loved hearing that Kathy, was the house with the chicken of the woods, and they didn't eat them, but they actually went to the trouble of calling the people that did. That's kind of remarkable. The gal that I went foraging with today, she didn't want any mushrooms. She really enjoyed foraging, but she doesn't eat them. I said, great, you're like exactly who I want to forage with. So yeah, I think figuring out what it is that sparked us, and then also how is the best way to share something that is this fantastic, right? That has gotten such a bad rap. And a lot of my education is around, busting some of the mycophobia that's out there, and really sort of head on trying to talk to folks about all of the benefits that are being overlooked by the, I would say, inordinate expression of mycophobia that exists. And I wonder if other people have experienced that, where people are like, oh, you go mushroom hunting? Like, wow, isn't that dangerous? You're still here? Mm-hmm. So opening it up again, any questions about what some of the tips and techniques or stories of children being brought into the woods, and some of the, I'm always just blown away with how good children are at learning mushrooms. Not necessarily leading with sort of like the Latin name, but you show them a mushroom a couple times and you teach them about it, boy, they get it. They get it really quickly. So that's always very, very fun.
I was just going to comment that we walk with our grandkids and we see them. We take care of them 4 days a week. And one of the things we do is there's a small pond nearby with a lot of trees. And so we go over there to see the turtles and the ducks and the babies, and look for mushrooms. And so even at 18 months in the stroller, we would stop to the log, maybe pick off one, look at it, talk about the color of the mushroom, smell it, do all the things that you're talking about. And now they just love going out, and they love having a whistle. That's big. So we blow a whistle when we find something. And they never very far from us, but sometimes we can spread out at a little park and they're looking around the edge for the mushrooms. And there's been, like today, they looked over the porch at their house and they spotted the inky caps that were growing down below, and they come running in the house. There's mushrooms in the backyard. So then we had to go down and go out, but and check them out. But they love doing spore prints. That's a big thing. Only one of the 5 actually eats mushrooms, and her list now, she's up to 21 different mushrooms that she's tasted. Wow. And she rates them. She likes to say, I like this one. Nah, this one's nah, so that's kind of fun too.
Yeah, I think let's talk a little bit about eating and mushrooms. When I talk with kids in the woods or anywhere else at events about mushrooms, and I always ask sort of by a show of hands, who likes mushrooms, and then who wouldn't eat a mushroom if it was the last food on the planet, right? And there's always a good bunch of kids who are ixnay on the mushrooms, right? Not eating them. So what I like to suggest is that it's not so much the flavor of the mushrooms, but it's probably the texture that kids in particular are not keen on, just like they might not like raw oysters at that age. And so we talk about cooking mushrooms, and I would recommend to anybody who's trying to engage a younger person in the culinary aspects of wild mushrooms is to hit them with high heat, some kind of fat, whether it's olive oil or butter, and a little bit of sea salt. And in Mason Ghost mushrooming, I have 4 different recipes, but 3 of them are basically a version of, there's a mushroom satay, which is, putting your whatever type of mushroom it is, and in this case, it's a lobster mushroom, in a hot frying pan with olive oil, with some sea salt at the end, and letting it crisp up nicely. So you get that lovely umami blackened flavor on both sides. And you really cook it like you would a good steak. Cook it in such a way that you're keeping that middle a little bit tender, but getting that nice crispy outside. And then the other mushroom recipe is for a black trumpet crisp, which is essentially the same idea. A little bit of olive oil into a high heat oven, letting them crisp up but not burn, and bring them out, putting a little bit of sea salt on, and then eating them like a chip or like a crisp. And those are phenomenal, of course. And then the one of the other recipes is for an omelet, a morel omelet. In that case, giving that morel, each of the morels, a nice browning on the outside with some butter and a little bit of garlic before putting it in to the omelet, so that you don't get a bite of like some kind of weirdly textured mushroom in there. You get a nice crispy piece of well-cooked mushroom that just elevates and adds to the flavor of the omelet. So those are some ways. It's a really just one way, but in a variety of recipes and approaches. But you really want to hit all of these mushrooms with good heat and good fat of some sort. Ideally, if you have like duck fat, that's amazing. If you're have access to that, that you could turn most non-mushrooms eaters into converts at that approach. And so Kathy was asking in the chat, like, do you get people to enjoy mushroom this way that swear that they hate them? My answer is all the time. This wonderful video that the Austin Mycological Club did when we did an event there in September, and there's this just precious young girl who, I did the question, who doesn't like mushrooms? She raised her hand. She's like, can't stand mushrooms. And I was like, all right, we're gonna do a mushroom throwdown. I'm gonna cook a mushroom, and you're gonna see if it's any different than the ones you get at the store. And of course, she tasted one, and then she gave it the thumbs up, and there was, the crowd went wild. It was great. But it was like, and then she did it with the rest. We were trying a bunch of different mushrooms that day. That's another really, really fun thing to do with kids is a mushroom tasting. And I laugh, but it's true. You can forage at Whole Foods for a nice variety of wild mushrooms right in the mushroom section. You probably get, at this point, without really half trying, 10 different varieties if you go through every type that they have. And you come home and you do a mushroom tasting session where you have a bunch of different frying pans out, a little bit of butter in each one, and then you put them out on plates with the name of the mushroom on it. And you can taste each one, and they taste quite different, and they smell quite different. And that activity in and of itself can really elevate kids' thinking about food, of course, and about taste and the different tastes that different mushrooms have.
I don't know why, but there's something about like when you fall in love with something and you kind of want to prove how great it is to everyone else, and kind of, like convert people. Like I always feel like when someone says, nope, I don't like any mushrooms. And then I want to ask them which ones they've tried. And have you tried this one? Have you tried this one? You know, well, no, because I don't like any mushrooms. And I almost see it as like a challenge.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kathy. And one of the things I would say is, going back to this point about texture, it's not necessarily that they don't like mushrooms, it's they probably don't like the way they've ever been presented when them cooked. And if you can, I challenge anybody to not at least somewhat be willing to contemplate the idea that a chanterelle and butter, a little bit of garlic and a little sprinkle of salt on it, that is like, it's just delicious, but it has to be really well, browned and really well cooked. So yeah, and there's a conversation in the chat about cooking, and I like open it. I'd love to hear what people say. I've done a ton of research on mushroom cooking techniques, and it really does depend on the type of mushroom. You can't use any fat source for every type. Butter burns at a high heat, so works best for sautés. For more substantial ones, you need to use a fat with a high burn temp, like peanut oil. And that's a great point. I'm not such a fan, actually, of some of the mushrooms that really just absorb a lot of the fat that you might put in them. I would put hen of the woods and chicken of the woods, and certainly dryads into those categories. Those mushrooms that are a little, denser and tougher. They really need a different type of cooking oil. I absolutely agree with that. I'm also a little tiny bit picky myself about which, having eaten a bunch of different mushrooms, which ones I like. So honestly, I'm not a huge big fan of chicken in the woods. I'll eat it if it's very fresh and you're just getting the outside edges, but I'm not really into that woody stock. That's just me, but it's great in a soup and other things. So yeah, mushroom cooking is a whole other category. And again, you could have an entire evening just talking about the different ways to cook mushrooms. I'm specifically trying to talk about how to engage kids in the idea that something that maybe they didn't think was that palatable might be more palatable if it's keeping it simple. We're not layering in a lot of heavy sauces in here. Things we're just trying to get out that flavor and the crunch as opposed to the smush. So yeah, and I love cast iron. There's a note in the comments about cast iron. Just absolutely adore cast iron for mushrooms, and I think by far my favorite way to cook a mushroom is in a cast iron pan. If you all don't have cast iron, the hardware store usually sells really good cast iron. So anybody else, any other points about that? Crispy bacon to soft bacon, same goes for mushrooms. Absolutely. Although, Mike, the crispy versus soft bacon, we could probably do a whole nother hour on that, because I had 15 teenagers here over the weekend for a birthday party. I have a 17-year-old, and I made bacon in the morning, and gosh darn if they didn't all start talking about crispy versus the non-crispy bacon, and it was kind of evenly split. I was surprised. I was like, wow, who likes not crispy bacon? Apparently there are people that do. So go figure. Yeah, that's funny. But I think it brings out the flavor to have the crisp. So yeah, and just as we begin to wrap down our hour, I'm hoping that a lot of you will consider coming to the event that you're I find with some squeal. That's good. The event that your board is putting together, it's really going to be quite a wonderful day for kids, specifically an entire day devoted to mushroom education and mushroom activities for kids. We're doing things like we do painting, like we have these mushrooms that we paint, and we have a whole variety of paints and supplies for that. And we're going to do ID sessions and a foray and there's activities, bingos. And so there's just a ton of things being planned to get kids interested in this whole world that we're already interested in. So Aaron says he has a friend who's a vegan but doesn't care for mushrooms, and he cooked him up with some seitan. Now, okay, you're gonna have to maybe, Aaron, you might have to unmute and tell us about this, because I'm not a big seitan fan myself. I'm not even pronouncing it right. Seitan. But I'd love to hear from you on that topic if you want to talk about it, because I'm always curious to get different ideas.
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So made them up. So seitan is kind of like wheat gluten and a bunch of other stuff, but kind of wheat gluten based. And echinoderma is resinous polypore. It kind of tastes like beef, I think, a little bit anyway. Yeah, so this was kind of like a house party, and I made beef ribs for everyone else, and then for this one person, I made this dish, and smoked it on the grill, so it was kind of smoky and beefy, but it was completely vegan, and the person loved it. And because really with resinous polypore, you only kind of make a broth in a way. And then the broth is used as the flavoring for whatever else, the texture being the seitan. So yeah, they loved it.
Yeah, and I think of that as sort of it's more of like a woody, thicker mushroom, right? So is that why you just make the broth from it?
Yeah, so there's kind of like a white edge to it. That can be soft and that can be edible, but most of the time it's pretty tough. Mm-hmm. So the reason why you wouldn't eat the mushroom by itself and make more of a broth is simply because it's so tough.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a good thing. And then Ron has a cautionary tale, which I'm curious about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Good. Yeah, well, my origin story didn't start till I was like 40 something. And I go back to the days of Yule Gibbons. Anybody? Does that ring a bell with
Sure,
anybody?
the hunting the asparagus.
So yeah,
what's it called? Stalking the wild asparagus.
I was doing foraging for wild edibles, and lamb's quarter, and I ate milkweed pods and stuff. But anyway, I think Yule Gibbons only had a couple of mushrooms. But anyway, I had a girlfriend, and we went up to it. There's a cabin up near Cross Lake, Minnesota, and there were a lot of Amanita muscarias up there, and I thought they were really cool. Anyway, my girlfriend got me a mushroom book. It was Orson Miller's first book, and I was finding all these little brown mushrooms around stumps, and so I got the book out, and man, I studied it carefully, really carefully, and I thought it was hunting, Amylaria melia at the time. So I said, yeah, I'm sure of this, man. I checked out every little thing. So then gonna cook some up. So I had some nice fresh buttons. They were beautiful. But I cooked them like I don't know, back, when I cooked button mushrooms from the store, I just kind of lightly sauteed them, Anyway, I cooked these sort of sauteed in butter, these honey mushrooms, and later on that night, man, we were both like really sick. It was pretty bad, and we were able to maintain the relationship. She actually did eat other mushrooms later. But
you ever
anyway,
figure
the
out what
moral of
they
that
were?
story is later editions and most books now, they'll say, be sure you thoroughly cook those honey mushrooms because it has a toxin in there that the heat breaks down. But if you don't cook it thoroughly enough. So that was my beginning. And then at that time, I didn't didn't know that there were mushroom clubs, and somewhere I heard something that there was a mushroom club in Minnesota. So I joined, and it was Minnesota Mycological Society, and I'm here, I don't know, 40 years later, I'm still.
Well, I'm so glad, Ron, that you
with it.
joined, because gosh knows what could have happened if you had not gotten together with the club, if you had continued down your path of picking and finding. But that is a good cautionary tale, and getting back into bringing kids into the woods. You don't have to convince a child or anybody really that mushrooms are good to eat. There are so many other activities that we can do with kids around mushrooms. So if you're getting resistance from kids for mushrooms, they are a slightly grown up food. They might be a something that your palate has to adjust to, and that is incredibly valuable, just to acknowledge that they may not like mushrooms, and they still could enjoy going into the forest and discovering everything that mushrooms can offer us, including, making a beautiful spore, art piece of paper that they can then, put in their journal or mail as a letter. They could do some beautiful photography. They can absolutely I have so much fun with kids making dioramas. We go out into the woods, we pick a bunch of, birch bark that's, on trees that are on the ground, and moss, and we put everything that we can find, little berries, little mini trees that we make, and they make a whole scene using old turkey tails and old artist conchs and things that they find, and they make like little fairy houses, and their imagination goes wild, and there's so much that can be done. I always talk about the fairies in the woods and the little woodland creatures that like to be around the mushrooms. There's a whole world under there that they can discover, having nothing to do with having to eat any of it. You never have to eat any of it. So there's that makes it really quite an accessible world. Yeah.
I want to do I'd like to do a shout out to Ron, who's my mentor and one of the first people I met in the club. And Ron, I remember, and I was probably 30, but I remember you saying to me, oh gosh, you're so much younger than I was when you started. Just think of how much you learn. And I got to say that just a week ago at a lecture to someone who was about Saphira's age. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so much younger than I am. Just think of how much more you're going to know than I do when you're older. So it's full circle, Ron, that I got to say that to someone.
Ron, I hope when I'm out there, we have a chance to meet. One of the best things about, I've been doing mushroom education with kids for over 20 years, but one of the best things about having written a book is that now I'm going around the country and meeting folks like yourselves in all the different clubs, literally all across America. And without giving ourselves too much of a round of applause, mushroom people are just the best. They're just the best people. They're so willing and warm and welcoming and wanting to share this knowledge. It's just been such a joy to meet everybody and have this shared passion. So I'm in deeper than ever. I can't wait to come out to Minnesota.
Perfect. Yeah, to everyone who's coming to the event on Sunday, the 21st, Ron is going to be at the ID table. So
Fantastic.
if we're going to, he's got a huge collection of dried mushrooms. So he'll be bringing out his usual specimens and talking about them. And then, of course, if we find things in the woods, which it's starting to get so nice. I was up north just this weekend doing a shiitake workshop. And when I left there, like, it wasn't super green, and I came back and my plum tree's blooming and there's dandelions in my yard. So it's a really good sign that by the 21st, we'll be finding some mushrooms in Thomas Lake Park. So if you maybe didn't get into one of the forays on the weekend, please come out to Thomas Lake, because there's space there and there's a nice little pond to walk around. So who knows, we might find, we'll have a nice ID session for sure there.
Yeah. And regardless if we find them live, there will be mushrooms there to touch and explore and learn from. And I mean, every event that I go to, I learn something new, no matter what it is. Always. It's such a vast field of knowledge, and I know this much compared to what there is out there. It's very humbling. It's very humbling to study mycology.
Yeah, when anyone says, "Oh, you're the expert," I always want to correct them that I am completely not the expert. I will call Ron the expert, but I'm not the expert.
Yeah.
Another funny thing, a friend of mine on the West Coast, we recently saw each other, and he talked about a meme he saw on Instagram or something, and he said there was a jar and it had the word swear jar on it, and it had a little bit of money in it. And then the jar next to it said, "When I start talking about mushrooms, but nobody really asked." And it was just overflowing with money, which I thought was great. So I feel like it is one of those things where you just really do want to tell everyone. And for the longest time, it'd be like, "Oh, there she's talking about mushrooms again." And now people are asking. I think it's starting to get...
Well, the size of your club, Kathy, if it's any indication, you all are growing in leaps and bounds out there. It's just, the fact that you have to limit forays is just such a foreign idea to us here. So yeah, there is definitely some sort of seismic shift happening.
Mm-hmm.
Ron, you've probably seen that over your course of your foraging time.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Couple comments too, not to cut you off, but Ron, John wanted to know that many of us benefited from your vast knowledge and willingness to share, and that you're a treasure. So heads up for that. And Aaron's pointing out that in addition to the morels and ramps and lovage and nettles and fiddleheads, can be found right now central to north central Michigan and Minnesota. I'm sorry, and Michigan probably for that matter, and also Vermont. We're thick in the middle of all of those things right now, which is really, really lovely.
One of my favorite things to pick are actually dandelions, only because I feel like they're so kind of unappreciated and hated, and I like to spin it, right? So I think, even though mushrooms are having their heyday, I like to appreciate something that maybe someone hasn't seen the beauty of quite yet.
All right. Well, we are at our hour. Are there any last questions or conversations that anybody wants to have? Anybody has some compelling moment that they want to share, and if there's anything that came up for you all tonight as a question around your own role as an educator. Each of you is a mushroom educator, whether you know that or not, simply because most people know absolutely nothing about mushrooms. So even if you know just a little bit, you know more than most people.
Yeah, Safira, please share.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've got a little story that I'll tell. I don't know. It's been actually my grandson is about to graduate from high school now, but when he was younger, I taught him what what a morel was. So one Saturday I was out all day long looking for morels, and man, I just found maybe one or two. So I decided I would stop by my daughter's place, and when I got there, my grandson comes running up with this big, beautiful morel and says, "Granddad, look what I found."
Right in the yard.
Yeah, right.
All right. And Safira has a story.
All right. So when I went to the mushroom parade, like I learned these Latin names. I learned 4 Latin names, and they've got stuck in my head since I went there. Like I will like never forget them. I don't know why, but it just gets so stuck in your head, like because they're so like once you know them, they're easy to identify and remember because you go over them in your head so many times, and you're like, that's an Amanita multisquamosa, or that's this, or that's that, and then it's just like, oh.
Well, Asia, I'm a little jealous because I don't have that problem. I have the opposite problem where I cannot remember Latin names of things. As you get older, I tend to like the common name because it's usually a descriptor. So, you've got your, many, I don't know, a birch polypore. It's on a birch tree, it's a polypore. I can remember that. Then the Latin name is going to be much more complicated. And the other thing is that I'm finding that the 5-year-olds and that crowd, not so into Latin. They can remember like that's a brown boletes. Okay, they can remember that. But the other thing that Gary Linkoff talked a lot about, the names of mushrooms and the identification is such an sort of a predominant part of the crowd sharing and the information, but that there's really so much other things about the mushrooms to study. And he was always a little bit, he liked to veer off and talk about, well, what's that mushroom growing around? And let's look at the trees and talking about how much more there was to a mushroom than just its name. And I thought that was a really interesting way to look at things too, because there does seem to be in the mycological world a very big emphasis on naming of things. And not that there's anything wrong with naming. We all like to do that. I love name tags, for example. They're very helpful. But it's also its place and its context. I think his point is just as important as the name, which I thought that was a very good point. And Mike points out that the Latin names are outdated. More reason for me not to have to remember them in the first place, right?
I do feel like the names changing is making people a little looser about it. It used to be like you had to know exactly which, like you're saying, Safira, like which Amanita is it? And you had to know if you were going to speak smartly about it. But just knowing even that it's an Amanita is such a great starting point. And yeah, we were at she was at the Barenet Foray, and we found some species that folks hadn't seen for a long time. And it was really exciting. And I know you were kind of sketching them out and stuff, which I think is also a really fun way to get to know them better, is to draw them, and it's sort of gives you that memory. I want to show everyone a really gross picture. Speaking of kind of naming and finding mushrooms, this is a mushroom that when I was at work, and the guys who work in the music department talked about being in the basement and that there was a leak, and they put a mop head on it to suck it up, and then kind of forgot about it and came back like, I don't know, probably a month later. And so this is the mop with mushrooms growing on it in our office. And they're like, we have mushrooms, you have to have Kathy come look at them. And same thing, I was like, I'm pretty sure they were Pizziza, from seeing like the cup fungi out in the wild. So I'm like, let's look up Pizziza. And sure enough, it was like Pizziza growing indoors. And it's called Pizziza domiciliana, which to me is like the domicile, like it's the pizziza that grows in your house.
Oh
And
my
I
God.
told them that I just wanted to share it with everyone. And they're too embarrassed. They're like, you can't let them know that we have mushrooms growing accidentally in the office. I'm like, but it's so awesome and gross on a really stinky mop head.
Oh my God. I just
There's
wonder what's going on with the
everywhere.
black mold. Yeah.
Right. Just never
Wow.
know when you're going to be called on to like ask if you can help figure out what a mushroom is.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing is that the Latin names do sometimes when you're working with children, it can actually have the opposite of your intended effect, which is you're hoping to get them interested and involved, and then if you throw out a very big long name of something, I've seen it, where kids just their faces will sort of go, oh, this is beyond me, or we're now into something that I don't understand. And then they sometimes might even feel like, not only not engaged, but not engageable because it's beyond where they're at that stage. So I always try to meet the child where they are in their learning development. And there's always something exciting that you could share with them about mushrooms that is not necessarily going to make them feel like it's inaccessible. So that's part of what the approach is to getting kids excited about the mushroom kingdom, not necessarily like a certain name of something, even though that may be where their knowledge leads them. It might not be their first point of entry. So yeah. And then there's another comment about the smells, which I actually have a really wonderful time with kids with smells. That's one of the places that you can engage children almost universally with things that smell bad. Like kids love stuff that smells bad. And especially if you can name it something like slightly inappropriate, this particular, matsutake smells like a stinky sneaker, and it actually smells like a stinky sneaker. And then, you pass around the matsutake and the kid's like, stinky sneaker. And you're like, that's actually an identifying characteristic of this particular mushroom. And then you could get into talking about that. So there's really, smells is a wonderful point of engagement and entry with kids of all ages. And a lot of times kids figure out, once they know that they have permission to smell mushrooms and they're not being told no, they figure out for themselves the certain attributes of mushrooms. For example, if they have a lactarius and their hands are getting all milky, they'll say, oh, what's all this white stuff on my hands? Ew, it's seeping out all this white stuff. And oh, you've got a vulmus lactarius, and it's going to have milk seeping out everywhere, and smell that, it smells like seafood, and this is what it is, and it's going to help you identify the species. So that's where the touch and the things that you can't do over Zoom, sadly, but you're in the woods and a kid comes running up and is carrying something like that, you can take the smells and the things that the mushroom emits, and the slimy tops. Oh God, slimy tops are so great. Any mushroom with a slimy top, you're off to the races, So you have a niece who loves wolf's milk mushrooms. Yes, little pink mushrooms. And yeah, there's a fun thing you can do with the the wolf's milk mushrooms, are the little pink ones that grow on the logs. And if you take a stick, you pick up a stick nearby and you see them, and you push into it, it looks like a toothpaste tube exploding, or and that in particular is a very exciting thing to do with kids. Of course, everybody does the stepping on the puffballs. John is talking about dead man's fingers, and also we out in California at the mushroom fair, somebody had, I think I have a piece of it here, dead man's, I'm going to mangle the name, but it smells so bad. I mean, it really was like the worst smelling mushroom. So I carried it around with me all week to schools and passed it around in classrooms. It was a huge hit. It was just, it was kids were pretending to faint, they would smell it. And, I would suggest that, oh, this smell is so strong, it's going to knock you out. And they would go like this, and they would like pretend to fall on the floor. It was actually really very strong. So it wasn't that much of a pretend. So, yeah. Anything else? Entertain many kids with a group of old puffballs, stinkhorns, yes. And what was the genus of those stinkhorns? There's a question for you. Mike, what are you asking? What's the genus of the stinkhorns, John? Is that an inside joke?
Yes.
All right. For those who aren't familiar, stinkhorns are another mushroom that you can get some kids pretty going about. Like you can walk by them and they're going to smell like ammonia, they just are really stinky. You can smell them well before you see them often.
And if you want to tap into the sophomoric humor, yes.
Yeah.
You could also
Yes, they are slightly
the whole phallus thing.
Yes,
And
they're
about body
slightly
parts and
phallic
stuff.
looking.
Yeah.
Not unlike our friends the morels, for that matter.
Well,
right?
that's true. Yes.
There's many a joke that can happen along that way, not safe for prime time, but yes, there's so Kathy, are we over our time? Are we okay?
Oh, we're good. Yep.
Okay, good. I don't want anybody to feel like they have to stick around if they have to go get dinner or get bed or anything else. But I obviously you can see from this conversation, I could talk about this all the way through clear to when I leave for Minnesota. So it's just my favorite of all topics.
But you have to leave time for the Minnesota goodbye because it's
okay. All
notoriously
right.
long.
Well, yeah, and
yes,
and maybe just some conversation. Very very curious to observe the from New England to observe the Midwestern.
We're a little Minnesotan. Yeah,
yeah. Well, you have to prime me for my trip out there. What do I need to know?
No, I think when we're in person, we're a little more talkative. Yeah, but John kind of hinted about the Minnesota goodbye, that once you get us going, then if we're maybe late bloomers. I don't know. Hard to get us to stop or to leave. Say goodbye for about a half hour. Like, well, yep, I better be going pretty soon now. So we may be starting our Minnesota goodbye end to the meeting, which lasts about 15 minutes here. But yeah, I think Melanie's inviting anyone to just share any experience they have, just origin story or hunting mushrooms, or enjoying getting kids involved, or I guess also because it is our monthly meeting, if you have any questions for Ron or John about things you've seen in the woods.
Well, just a comment. The foray that we had done in Forestville, we saw rain all the way around us, and it just didn't hit Forestville until like Friday night, Saturday. And that made a gigantic difference, actually, when it came to yellow oysters. They started popping, and also the pheasant backs started coming, but we never saw a true morel. Not at all. But they're coming. The ground temps were 54, so that's right there. That's fine. Jack in the Pulpit were up. Haven't seen a lilac in bloom yet, but I've seen some dandelions going to seed, so we're getting there.
Yes, do you have the invasive golden oyster in Vermont?
I believe actually we do, although I don't think it's probably as ubiquitous as it is out your way yet.
We don't have it very quite here in our in our metropolitan area much yet, but it's been working its way up from someplace that escaped in Iowa, we believe.
Damn Iowa.
Hardly, there's hardly anything good.
Careful. There's a
hardly
number
anything-
of us that are expatriates from Iowa.
that-
There's
Careful.
hardly
that
anything
wasn't
good
true.
that comes out of
Um,
Iowa.
Yeah.
Actually what we do have is a lot of plant invasives, and of course we also have the emerald ash borer, as well as the hemlock, the Elgin, the white that takes down the hemlocks, and that really starting to see evidence of that in our forests, and that's a little discouraging for us mushroom hunters.
That would be sad to see in northern Wisconsin, because the hemlocks are just fabulous, and so
It's something
that's
that
about as close as it gets for us.
that's something really odd is that, yeah, we don't really have any hemlocks in Minnesota, but you go into northern Wisconsin, which isn't that far away, and there's quite a bit of hemlock. Not sure what the reason is, but
We cut all ours down. That's the reason. They got all logged, I believe.
Emerald ash borer, though, has had a major impact in this area. There's a lot of dead ash trees.
I was looking at ash. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just say I was admiring an ash tree just this weekend and noticed that it was missing some bark, and I thought I didn't see any evidence of bugs, but it kind of immediately made me wonder had it been visited by emerald ash borers. But yeah, they're
terribly
disappearing.
unlikely.
They're disappearing around here.
I was down here, down in Ohio and Chicago in the last couple of years. And it's, where you see a lot of ash trees after the demise of the elms, you saw ash trees, growing in little outlots and in industrial parks and stuff like that. And all you saw in those areas now was just scrub brush. It was no trees at all. Because it had been ash in there. Before that, it had been elm, but.
Yeah. All right. Oh,
Pretty good. Thank you so much.
yeah. Thank you, Mel.
Melanie.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for having me in person. And I can't wait to see all your little short people that show up for these events and get to meet some of your offspring and share our, shared love of this wonderful sport, for lack of a better term.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks everyone. It looks like there's
Thanks,
still.
Mel. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for joining in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take care.
Been good. I've learned a lot.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great one, everyone. See you soon.
Yep.
Bye.